Right, so Unit 3, the colonial policy, the colonial state, we've discussed the paternalistic policy. If you look at this unit here, the idea is we are trying to understand the motivation behind the colonial administration during this period. All right, what is the motivation? Okay, this is important. If you look at the title question, you have to describe the colonial state and state whether the territories are purely a colonial state. So you describe what a colonial state is, and you and the second task is you state whether it is purely a colonial state. Now, when you talk about this idea of what is a colonial state, if you look at your PowerPoint lecture, probably 5, or rather 4, a colonial state is built on what is called an absolutist model. In any absolutist model, you have a authoritative figure or authoritative group of actors, or they call it oligarchy sometimes. But I'll give you an example. In any dictatorial regimes, you have the military governments at the top. You look at North Korea, you have Kim Jong-un. He sits at the top, and then he controls the government system, economics and social aspect of North Korea. That is an example of an absolutist model. So in all colonial states are built according to this idea here, or this model here, absolutist model. So, whether the state is strictly an absolutist model or not an absolutist model, it's debatable. All right? So the first tutorial question talks about what a colonial state is. And a colonial state is supposed to be an absolutist state built on an absolutist model. Whether it is purely an absolutist model or not, that is our objective here to find out after discussing the paternalistic policy in Papua and New Guinea territories. So what do you think? The paternalistic policy, and if you look at slide number 5, 6, I think, by definition or by statement by Governor William McGregor. So Governor McGregor states that he said that we went to New Guinea solely and simply to serve our own ends. And this fact should never be forgotten in dealing with natives of that country. That will tell you whether, or that is an indication of whether the colonial territories are purely an absolutist model or not. So, that statement, the paternalistic policy, the motivations behind it, the government or the colonial administration came in, they were not adamant to have a direct absolutist control or model of control over the territories. So paternalistic, okay, so you look at the word paternal, it derives from, or has another, what is another meaning of paternal? Fatherly, or father. So paternalistic policy is another word of saying paternalistic policy is to say a fatherly policy. So you imagine as a father, or what would your father do, okay, in trying to take care of you? His duty is to be responsible over your well-being. That means he will not suppress you, or not saying suppress, that means that he tries to behave in such a manner that he likes, okay, that promotes your well-being. Something like that. But the idea here is that the paternalistic colonial policy, the motivations behind it, making it not an absolutist model, is the idea that the state would have limited control or limited interaction with the society. Meaning that they are charged to take care of the society, but they will not be, what's the right word? Let me put it this way. In essence, they do not want to intervene with the traditional or the cultural aspect of our society. Okay? So limited interaction with our people is the overall motivation of the paternalistic policy. But you might say, but how comes we have racist policies after 1945? So the meaning of this paternalistic policy is, with limited interaction with the indigenous society, means that the places where the establishment are or was, okay, is not, or the indigenous population are not encouraged to go to where places there where there is a white settlement. All right. So that's the only difference. But let's go ahead. So to answer tutorial question number 1 is a colonial state by definition is an absolute state. Whether the territories are purely a colonial state, the territories are not purely a colonial state because of the paternalistic policy. There is some flexibility in terms of the administration trying to not overly interfere with the indigenous people. All right? That's the reason why they sent patrol officers. They didn't send a cavalry of army or battalions of army to go in and civilize the indigenous people. No, they sent someone. They sent a patrol officer being accompanied by the Royal Papua New Guinea Constabulary. And most of these police personnel were not white race people or settlers, but were recruited indigenous police personnel. So that will tell you that the paternalistic policy is not carried out during this time, and the state is not purely an absolutist state. Okay, let's go to question 2. Explain forms of paternalism and give example of it. There are various forms. Now, important here is forms are different from features. Features of a paternalistic policies are such that ideological and social in making. Ideological is the ideas behind paternalistic policy, and we've talked about the ideas already. and social aspect are the measures implemented. Okay, you can find it, I think, on PowerPoint 7. If you look at PowerPoint 8, this probably sums up the paternalistic policy. And that in the PowerPoint reads, the native could not improve himself, and therefore it was the responsibility of the white master to uplift him by hard work so as to ensure not only his improvement, but indeed his very survival. So the keyword here is, if you look at it, the keyword of uplifting, okay? But uplift is another term for modernization, development. So how do you think the civilization or modernization of our indigenous people were carried out? The intention to make them develop or to make them modernize or modernize the society should be achieved through hard work. What is that hard work? And that's manual labor or laboring. So that is why they bring in plantation. So their idea of modernization, development, okay, is achieved through plantation system. So their idea of making us, or idea of modernizing the indigenous societies was to make our people work for money. And that is the same idea carried forward here. Why are you guys seated here? You are all sitting here because you want to get a level of education, a degree. And what are you going to use that degree for? To work for money. So that idea, that principle still exists. The idea of modernization is they will train you how to do work, and you will achieve work independently, and then you will earn an income. So what I'm doing is I'm training you, okay, to do the manual labor, so that when you get a degree, and if there is a question about politics, then you know how to answer that question of politics. When you answer that question, they will pay you for that answer. Okay, the same template carries forward. But that is the motivation, the ideas behind the paternalistic policy, and that very idea was carried forward after independence. So we are also used to the idea of getting an education and working for money that we forgot other avenues, the entrepreneurial skills. We forgot, it's not we forgot, but we buy into that aspect that we tend to forego other useful avenues to make money. Okay? It's not getting a degree that will only ensure that you make money. You can sell betel nut, sell water. You look at people at the traffic lights, they're making more money than me standing here and talking to you. Or even you, when you go out and graduate, you will earn less than people selling water and doing market out there. But the stereotype and the thinking of getting an education to work for money was actually started during the colonial era through this paternalistic idea here. All right. Examples of it. I think in the quiz I gave various questions came to the examples of these paternalistic policies here. Yeah. Like for example, civilizing mission was under William McGregor and not, say, Hubert Murray. Did you guys pick that up? Okay, so an example of that. So civilizing mission under William McGregor, how does that relate to the whole idea of paternalization policy? Called the PAX, the Pax Yeah, Australiana. Well, that was the strategy, having to recruit a patrol officer, a KIAP. So a patrol officer his responsibility is to walk the terrain of our land, Lemes. With him, the patrol officer comes is what is called, they call them, police personals. So indigenous police personnel, they will put a lap with the with no shirts on, sandals, and then they'll carry their one barrel gun and then accompany the patrol officer. So that is an example of the paternalistic policy, where our people would not be frightened by a white man and their own relatives. Yes? If you, for example, if you bring a battalion of army, then you will scare off our indigenous people. So the idea was not to scare them off, okay, but to interact with them so that not to scare them off. All right. So that's why patrol officer KIAPs, they carry with them maps, tool bag, even medical supplies. They get census, they get records, and then they establish, importantly, is that they establish a political structure. They go to a village, they see a chief in the village, they tell the chief, you are now in charge of that village. In, let's say, the next month I will come and you will give me this piece of information. Okay? That's an example of a civilizing mission. That's number one. And number two is peaceful penetration. So peaceful penetration, we all, you all seated here belong to a type of Christian religion, okay, or organization or denomination, they call it. So in conjunction with the civilizing mission, the missionaries also came in. Now the missionaries came in and they spread the word of God. So they didn't come in with an army battalion. No, they came in with, let's say, 2-3 people with their Bible coming in and trying to spread the message. And missionaries were tasked to do that. And thirdly was civilizing through active or menial labor. Okay, so the three, if you look at the three examples here, first of all, these three examples here would not scare our people away, but sort of to make our people communicate with the colonial administration and form some sort of relationship. So that alone was not intended to chase away or frighten our people, but to get our people to understand their way of thinking. Okay? So that's why I said that although the colonial state is an absolutist model, the application of it in Papua New Guinea was not so absolute. Okay, follow that absolutist model. The Australian administration did not do what they did in Australia by they did very nasty things to the Aborigines during their the first settlers coming into Australia. They did not do that to Papua New Guinea. They had followed a different direction. All right. I thought that I would summarize it in 5 minutes, but it's 19 minutes going in. Okay. Look at the question number 3. Discuss objective and motivations of the gradualism policy. So, from 1945 to, let's say, 1960s, the paternalistic policy ensured that they at best not to interfere with the indigenous society, to leave them as they are, but to have a control over the political boundary. meaning that we were from 1945 or 1884, after 1949 to 1950, some of our societies, our people were still or had still not met or came into contact with any white settlers. The islands region was discovered around the 1940s. However, during that time, at the global politics, okay, what is called the decolonization process was happening. So the United Nations was established, and through that, the times have changed, and countries in Africa were calling for independence. So the decolonization process had contributed to speed up developments in Papua and New Guinea territory, or Papua New Guinea. Because of that, gradualism policy came in. Okay. Now, Paul Aslak was in charge of the gradualism era. All right, and what he did was implemented what is called the universal form of development or modernization. Universal meaning that formally is that if there is white presence in Boroko and there is lack of white settlers in Waigani, all government services would only focus in Boroko, meaning that any indigenous communities surrounding Boroko would have access to these basic health services. Now, during the gradualism policy era, that changed. Now, after 1960s, and I remember a question talks about that, after 1960s, the universalism policy sets in, meaning that if there is white settler in Boroko and there is absence of white settler in Waigani, the education and health services will still reach Waigani. So the gradualism policy aspect of it talks about this idea of spreading out development throughout the region to make the region prepare for inevitable self-government and independence. All right? Any questions before we move on? Okay, let's move on.